Enable EDR is our next generation antivirus product. It is a signatureless antivirus solution that not only protects against threats coming in from the outside, but also has a feature called rollback that allows you to reinstate a system affected by CryptoLocker to a previously known good state. There is no cloud connectivity needed for any of the decisions that need to be taken to protect your machine. Traditional antivirus is very heavy. They rely on signature database downloads every 15 minutes or every hour, and then during an AV scan, it uses that definition to look at every file on every machine and make a decision as to whether it is good or bad. That's obviously very network intensive, it's very resource intensive, and they don't offer up-to-date protection on new viruses because they're usually a day or two behind. Enable EDR doesn't use signatures, so everything that is done on the endpoint itself. As a file comes in, we have three main pillars that our detection engines look at. The first is a reputational check, and this leverages approximately 12 separate malware databases and aggregators. Basically asks, have we seen this file before? Is this something that we already know is bad? The next pillar is DFI, or Deep File Inspection. This is when a file is at rest, where EDR does a scan as it comes in, pre-execution, looks inside of it for over 100,000 variants of what might be inside that file. So has the file been packed, or if this file has a suspicious nature, like it's an exe file, but it also has links to a C2 server outbound. Those are suspicious entries inside that type of file that EDR would immediately quarantine ever before it starts running. The last pillar is the behavioral pillar, and this is the crown jewel of Enable EDR. This is where EDR watches every process that is being spun out from a machine and asks, what exactly is this process doing? And what that allows us to do is to stop threats in real time as they're being spun up. If we have an application that launches many child processes, for example, EDR's behavioral AI looks at those behaviors and says, wait a minute, we're just opening a document here, but suddenly there's a link going outbound, which the user clicks and starts to download some malware. It's at this point that Enable EDR starts to investigate that type of behavior and stop it from ever running in real time. And that's what gives Enable EDR such high efficacy rating. Your standard antivirus solutions will not be able to catch those viruses because they're relying on zero-day vulnerabilities. Standard antivirus will take 2 to 3 days to create and distribute a signature to protect your devices under management. Enable EDR does all of this autonomously without any user interaction, thus saving you time and money. Let's take a look. Profiles within EDR are what give endpoints protection based on the inbuilt detection engines. As a best practice, we suggest that you create a minimum of 2 profiles, one in detect-only mode and one in full protect mode, but you can create as many as necessary. To create a profile from scratch, simply click on the Add Policy button at the top of the screen. Or to edit an existing profile, simply click on the ellipse on the right-hand side of the screen. The first page is the policy page, and this is where we can set the different protection levels for our endpoints. On the right-hand side of the screen, we can see the detection engines that give EDR its power. Each one of these engines is looking for a different behavior, and these engines are constantly looking at the processes on a machine and making a decision in real time as to what is normal, what is suspicious, and what is a threat. You can also automate the behavior of EDR once a threat is detected. Kill and quarantine kills the threat and puts it to the side for further investigation. Remediate automatically removes any changes that malware, etc., will make to a device, such as adding scheduled tasks, changes to the registry, etc. Rollback is the ability to take a system that has been encrypted by a cryptolocker infection and return it to a previously known good state. It does this by leveraging the native VSS snapshotting capabilities of a machine. It creates a folder on an endpoint of roughly a gig in size, and every 4 hours it takes a snapshot. EDR will then harden that image, so if a cryptolocker tries to delete or corrupt the image, it will fail. If the detection engines of EDR are doing their job, you should never experience a cryptolocker attack, but it's a great insurance policy to have. And it should be noted that all of the actions that we can automate from here can be taken manually on the Analyze tab as well. I mentioned earlier a minimum of 2 policies, detect only and protect. The only difference between the 2 policies is that with a detect only policy, we don't automatically remediate any threats detected. A good use case for this would be if you're testing EDR on a machine with an existing AV solution in place. If you install EDR on that device, make sure that you use a detect-only policy, as a full protect policy may negatively impact on the endpoint. When you're transitioning from an existing AV solution to EDR, it's a best practice to deploy EDR and detect-only policy, remove the existing AV solution, then upgrade EDR to a full protect policy. So throughout the entire migration process, there's at least one AV solution in place at all times. We also have a containment feature called Disconnect from Network that is designed to stop the spread of threats. If this feature is enabled, it will stop endpoints that are infected from talking to any other interface apart from your EDR dashboard. I would suggest disabling this, as if EDR detects a false positive, the next phone call you're going to get will be from a very angry customer. You can manually take this action later, if necessary. EDR is agent-based, and you can control exactly how that agent behaves. EDR does not require a recurring AV scan of your endpoints, but you do have the ability to run a full AV scan when the agent is initially installed. Just be aware, like any other AV scan, it may put a load on the endpoint. EDR also installs a sys-tray icon, which you can disable if you wish. To use rollback, you can enable snapshots, and to stop the end user removing the agent or a cryptolocker from deleting or corrupting our snapshots, we will enable anti-tamper. If we scroll back up to the top of the screen, we can see additional functionality. Blacklist is the ability to proactively make a detection engine aware of a threat based on its SHA value. We can also take this action reactively later on. Exclusions allow us to exclude certain files, folders, etc. from the detection engines of EDR. We can create these exclusions manually, or we can choose from a pre-populated list that will automatically detect the location of the application and automatically add it to our exclusions. Network control allows you to standardize the Windows firewall settings on your endpoints. It is not a firewall module in itself, rather it allows you to create rules that take precedence over the local Windows firewall settings. Device control allows you to block or allow certain types of hardware, such as USB or Bluetooth devices, to stop threats from coming into an environment or to stop data leaving an environment. Once you have created your profile, you can deploy manually or en masse. To deploy manually, simply choose the device, edit it, and from the left navigation bar, go to EDR, turn it on, and choose the appropriate policy. Note, the installation is a 2-step process. Firstly, the install, which is silent and won't interrupt the end user, but it does require a reboot of the device to complete the installation. To mass deploy EDR, we return to our Integrations menu, choose Endpoint Detection and Response, and go to Settings. From here, we can deploy at the customer level or at the device level. Again, we simply switch it on, choose our profile, EDR gets pushed out automatically, but we will need to do a reboot of our machines to complete the install. Once EDR has been installed, the EDR status service is automatically applied to the devices, and this alerts based on various different metrics, such as threat detected, reboot required, etc. And like any check within RMM, you can choose to receive an email alert, an SMS in the event of one of the metrics going into a failed state. Once agents have been installed, information will start to populate to the dashboard. This is a read-only display that gives information about infected endpoints, agents requiring attention, unresolved threats, etc. over the last 30 days. From a day-to-day perspective, very little time will be spent on this screen as it is a read-only screen. The Analyze tab is where we get to see the detail around threats detected and take manual action if necessary. We can filter on our threats based on time range, operating system, mitigation status, etc. The main body of the screen shows us the names of the threats detected, but also the number of times a threat has been detected and on which machine or machines. As we scroll across, we can see the detection engine that would have detected a threat and the classification of threat also. If we want to manually take action on a threat, firstly, we can expand the drop-down beneath the threat to see specific information about it, its location, threat indicators, etc. To manually mitigate an action, simply tick the box next to the threat. From our Threat Actions drop-down, we choose Mitigation Action. From here, we can manually kill, quarantine, remediate, and roll back if necessary. Once you've resolved a threat, you can mark it as such to clear it down from your dashboard. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to reactively add a threat to a blacklist, you can do so from here. We can also manually disconnect a machine or a group of machines from the network. We can mitigate our actions manually, and then we can reconnect those devices to the network. On the Analyst Verdict tab, you can give your verdict as the analyst as to the nature of the threat. Is it a true positive? Is it a false positive? When you take ownership of a threat, you can mark it in progress. This lets your colleagues know that somebody is working this threat. This avoids duplication of effort. Once the threat has been resolved, you can mark it as such. If we click on the name of the threat, we drill down and get more detailed information and functionality specifically on this threat. Once again, our mitigation actions are built in. We can see what has occurred on this particular threat, the number of times it's been detected, the number of endpoints, its location, any command line arguments it would have utilized. On the right-hand side of the screen, we can see threat indicators, and this tells us why the detection engines of EDR took the action that they did. If we go to the Explore tab, we can see all the changes that this malware made on an endpoint. And this is the remediate functionality that I discussed when we looked at our policy earlier on. EDR will track every single change that the threat will make on an endpoint, and with the remediation function, it will automatically remove those changes. Changes to the registry, scheduled tasks, etc. And this is what gives EDR such high efficacy against your traditional AV solutions. Those solutions will more than likely target the actual threat itself, but won't be sophisticated enough to track all of the small changes that that malware will make. EDR can and will use this to put the machine back into a good working state before the malware infected the machine. The Timeline tab gives us an audit trail of this device and certain actions that were taken on it over a period of time. To take a trial of EDR, simply navigate to the Integrations Management piece on the left-hand menu bar, and where you see an Activate Now button, click this and it will self-provision a trial within 5 to 10 minutes. You may also need to amend your technician's roles and privileges so they too can see EDR. Go to Settings from your main tab, Roles and Permissions, and if we scroll down to Integrations Management, it's simply a case of assigning the correct privileges based on the responsibility of your engineers.